The stars looked different when you knew death was coming. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Liberty, watching the giant alien vessels appear in space around Earth. They came out of nowhere, like ghosts made of crystal and metal. Each ship was bigger than a city, and there were thousands of them. Jake had been in space for 15 years. He had seen asteroids crash into planets and watched stars die. But he had never seen anything like this. The alien ships moved, without sound, their hulls shining with a cold blue light that made his skin crawl. The first message came at exactly noon, Earth time. Every radio, every computer, every communication device on Earth suddenly spoke with the same voice. It was not human. The words were clear, spoken in perfect English, but there was something wrong with them. They sounded like ice breaking. "People of Earth," the voice said, "you will surrender now. You have 72 hours. If you do not surrender, we will destroy your planet and every human in this star system. This is not a request. This is a fact." The message repeated in every language humans had ever spoken: Chinese, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and hundreds of others. The aliens had been watching Earth for a long time. They knew everything about humans. They knew how to scare them. Dr. Lisa Carter was in her lab when the message came. She studied alien life, though until today, she had never seen a real alien. Her hands shook as she recorded the transmission. The voice patterns were unlike anything she had ever heard. These aliens did not think like humans. They did not feel like humans. General Pete Williams was in a meeting when his aide burst into the room. The general was a big man with gray hair and scars from old wars. He had fought in 3 different conflicts and thought he knew what fear looked like. He was wrong. The fear on his aide's face was something new. "Sir," the aide said, his voice barely a whisper, "we have a problem." Within minutes, every military base on Earth was on high alert. Satellites turned their cameras toward the alien fleet. What they saw made strong men pray and smart men cry. The alien ships surrounded Earth like a net. There was no escape. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian hegemony. They had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had conquered 47 different species. Some had fought back. Some had surrendered immediately. It did not matter. The result was always the same: total defeat. Admiral Vextar commanded the alien fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was not human, though he had 2 arms and 2 legs like a human. His skin was pale blue and his eyes were black as space. He had personally destroyed 17 planets. Earth would be number 18. Vextar did not hate humans. He did not feel anything about them at all. To him, they were just another young species that needed to learn their place in the galaxy. That place was on their knees. President Linda Hayes called an emergency meeting of world leaders. She was a small woman with brown hair and tired eyes. She had been president for only 2 years, and those years had been peaceful. Now she faced the end of everything humans had ever built. The meeting was held in a bunker deep under the Rocky Mountains. Leaders from every nation on Earth gathered around a table that had been built for much smaller problems. They argued in whispers as if speaking too loud might bring the aliens down on them faster. "We should surrender," said the Prime Minister of Britain. "We cannot fight them. Look at their ships. Look at how many they have." "And then what?" asked the President of Russia. "Do we become their slaves? Do we give up everything that makes us human?" President Hayes listened to them argue for 3 hours. Outside, people were rioting in the streets. Some were trying to escape to the moon colonies. Others were praying. Many were just waiting to die. Captain Morrison received new orders at sunset. He was to gather every human ship in the solar system and prepare for battle. It was not a battle they could win. Everyone knew that. The human fleet had 800 ships. Most of them were cargo haulers with guns bolted to their sides. The aliens had 50,000 warships, each one capable of destroying a moon. Dr. Carter worked through the night, trying to understand the alien technology. She studied their communications, their ship designs, everything she could find. What she discovered made her sick. The aliens were not just powerful, they were old. They had been conquering planets since before humans learned to use fire. But Carter found something else in the alien data. Something the aliens did not expect her to find. They were afraid. Not of humans, but of something else. Something they called the awakening. She did not understand what it meant, but she filed it away for later. As the second day began, more alien ships arrived. They came from all directions, filling the space around Earth until the stars were hidden. Children pointed at the sky and asked their parents why the night was so bright. Their parents had no answers. General Williams stood in his command center surrounded by screens showing the alien fleet. His staff worked quietly, knowing that every order they gave might be their last. The general had fought against impossible odds before, but this was different. This was not just impossible. This was suicide. President Hayes made her decision on the morning of the third day. She walked to the podium in the bunker, knowing that her words would be broadcast to every human in the solar system. Some were on Earth, hiding in their homes. Others were on Mars or the Moon or the space stations that orbited Jupiter. She looked into the camera and spoke in a voice that did not shake. "My fellow humans," she said, "we have been given a choice, surrender or die. But I believe there is a third option. We can choose to stand. We can choose to fight, not because we think we can win, but because some things are more important than winning. Some things are worth dying for." The aliens heard her words. Admiral Vextar smiled for the first time in 100 years. These humans were even more foolish than he had thought. They would make their own destruction easier. But across the galaxy, other species heard those words too. Species that had surrendered long ago. Species that had forgotten what it meant to be free. And deep in their hearts, something began to stir, something the aliens had tried very hard to kill. Hope. The 72 hours ended at midnight. Earth time meant nothing to the aliens, but they wanted the humans to know exactly when their world would end. Admiral Vextar gave the order to attack at 12:01 a.m. just to make a point. The first wave came from the outer edge of the solar system. 10,000 alien ships moving in perfect formation like a school of deadly fish. Their weapons charged with energy that could melt mountains. Their shields glowed with power that could stop any attack humans might try. Commander Ryan Torres watched them come from his position in the asteroid belt. His ship, the UES Defiance, had been a mining vessel just 6 months ago. Now it carried the biggest guns the humans could build and a crew that knew they were going to die. Ryan was 35 years old and had spent most of his life digging rocks out of space. He was not a soldier. He was not a hero. He was just a man who refused to kneel. Around him, 200 other ships waited in the shadows of the asteroids. They were miners, cargo haulers, and passenger ships. None of them belonged in a war, but war had come to them anyway. The aliens moved slowly, taking their time. They had done this 47 times before. They knew how it would end. The humans would fire their primitive weapons. The aliens would destroy them easily. Then they would move on to Earth and finish the job. Dr. Lisa Carter watched the battle begin from Earth's main command center. She had not slept in 3 days. Her eyes were red and her hands shook from too much coffee. Around her, computers tracked every alien ship and tried to predict their next move. It was like trying to predict an earthquake. The aliens fired first. Beams of purple light reached across space and touched the human ships. Where the beams hit, metal turned to gas and men turned to dust. In the first minute of the battle, 30 human ships died. But the humans did something the aliens did not expect. They did not run away. They did not surrender. They flew toward the alien ships, firing everything they had. Captain Amy Lewis commanded a ship called the UES Resilience. It had been a garbage hauler before the war, designed to carry trash from Earth to the recycling stations near Jupiter. Now it carried 50 missiles and a crew of 20 volunteers. Amy was 28 years old and had red hair that she kept tied back in a ponytail. She had joined the space service to see the galaxy, not to fight aliens. But when the call came, for volunteers, she was the first to sign up. Her ship was small and slow compared to the alien vessels. but it was also hard to hit. Amy flew between the alien ships like a mouse running between the feet of elephants. Her crew fired their missiles at anything that looked important. The aliens were confused. Their computers said the humans should be running away by now. Instead, they were attacking. The human ships were weak and their weapons were primitive, but they kept coming. Some of them crashed directly into the alien vessels, turning themselves into bombs. General Pete Williams watched the battle from his command bunker on Earth. The screens around him showed more human ships dying every minute. But they also showed something else. The aliens were slowing down. For the first time in 3,000 years, they were being careful. The aliens had technology that could destroy planets, but they had forgotten how to fight an enemy that would not give up. Their tactics were perfect for fighting other civilized species. They did not work against humans who fought like wild animals. Dr. Ken Murphy was a physicist who had spent his life studying how things moved in space. Now he was studying how alien ships moved and trying to find weaknesses. What he found surprised him. The alien ships were incredibly advanced, but they all moved in the same patterns. They followed rules, like a dance that never changed. The humans did not know the dance, so they did not follow the rules. This made them unpredictable. Commander Torres led his ships in an attack on the alien flagship. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. But as they flew towards certain death, something amazing happened. The alien ship moved out of their way. For just a moment, the mighty Admiral Vextar was afraid. Not afraid of dying, but afraid of these strange humans who did not act like any enemy he had ever faced. His ship could have destroyed all the human vessels with one shot. Instead, he ordered his fleet to pull back and regroup. Captain Morrison, watching from the U.S. Liberty, could not believe what he was seeing. The aliens were retreating, not because they were losing, but because they did not understand what they were fighting. The first battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the humans had lost 400 ships. The aliens had lost 1,200. For any other species, losing half their fleet would have meant surrender. For humans, it meant they were just getting started. News of the battle spread across the galaxy faster than light. Every species that had ever been conquered by the aliens heard the same impossible story. Humans had made the Zephyrian hegemony retreat. It had never happened before. On the planet Altair, an old soldier named Kylus heard the news and felt something she had not felt in 50 years. Hope. On Centauri, slaves in the mining camps whispered about the humans who would not kneel. On 1,000 worlds, people looked up at the stars and wondered if freedom was possible. Admiral Vextar called for reinforcements, not because he needed them to defeat the humans, but because he needed them to understand what the humans were doing. His battle computers could not process an enemy that ignored all logic. The aliens sent reports back to their home worlds. The report said the humans were using new weapons and unknown tactics, but that was not true. The humans were using old weapons and no tactics at all. They were just too stubborn to quit. Dr. Carter discovered something important in the alien communications she was monitoring. The aliens were talking to each other differently now. Before the battle, their messages were calm and confident. Now, there was something new in their voices. Uncertainty. President Hayes spoke to the world again that night. Behind her, the lights of burning cities lit the sky. In front of her, cameras carried her words to every human still alive. Today we learned something important, she said. We learned that the aliens can bleed. We learned that they can be afraid. Most importantly, we learned that we would rather die fighting than live on our knees. But the aliens had learned something too. They had learned that humans were not like other species. Humans did not calculate the odds before fighting. They did not surrender when defeat was certain. They fought until they won, or until they died, and sometimes they did both at the same time. Admiral Vextar stared at the reports from the battle. In 3,000 years of conquest, he had never lost so many ships to such a weak enemy. Humans had primitive weapons and no military training. They should have been easy to defeat. Instead, they had done something no species had ever done before. They had made the Zephyrian hegemony doubt itself, and doubt, Vextar knew, was more dangerous than any weapon. As the second wave of alien ships prepared to attack, something was happening across the galaxy. On 1,000 worlds, people were asking questions they had not asked in centuries. Questions about freedom. Questions about resistance. Questions about whether the aliens were really as powerful as they claimed to be. The humans had started something they did not even understand. They had lit a fire that would spread across the stars. And fires, once started, were very hard to put out. Admiral Vextar had ruled the galaxy for 200 years. He had conquered 17 planets personally, and watched 47 species kneel before the Zephyrian hegemony. Never, in all that time, had he called for the full fleet. Today, he broke that record. 50,000 alien ships jumped into the solar system like a metal storm. They came from every direction, surrounding Earth so completely that the planet disappeared behind their hulls. From the surface, humans could no longer see the sun. The sky was filled with enemy vessels, each one capable of turning a continent into ash. Commander Julie Parker had not slept in 5 days. She stood in Earth's evacuation center, watching the screens that showed thousands of human ships trying to escape the solar system. Most were passenger vessels, loaded with families and children. They moved slowly, like wounded animals trying to crawl to safety. Julie was 42 years old and had spent her career moving cargo between planets. Now she was trying to move 3 billion people before the aliens decided to end the game. It was impossible, but she kept trying anyway. That was what humans did. They tried impossible things, and sometimes, just sometimes, they worked. The alien fleet moved into position around Earth like the jaws of a giant trap closing. Admiral Vextar had brought every ship in the hegemony, every captain, every weapon, every soldier. This would not be a battle, this would be an execution, but the humans had spent the last week preparing their own surprise. In the cold darkness between Jupiter and Saturn, they had built something the aliens had never seen before. It was not a weapon in any normal sense. It was something much more dangerous. Captain Steve Collins piloted his fighter through the gap between 2 alien dreadnoughts. His ship was tiny compared to theirs, like a bee flying between elephants. But bees, Steve knew, could sting elephants if they aimed for the right spot. Steve was 26 years old and had wanted to be a pilot since he was 5. He had dreamed of exploring new worlds and meeting alien species. He had never dreamed of fighting them. But dreams, Steve had learned, did not always come true the way you expected. His mission was simple. Get close to the alien command ship and transmit a single message. The message contained coordinates to humanity's secret weapon, not because the humans wanted to use it, but because they wanted the entire galaxy to know it existed. Dr. Rachel Thompson had discovered the secret by accident. She was studying alien technology, trying to understand how their ships could talk to each other across impossible distances. What she found was both wonderful and terrible. The aliens used something called quantum communication. Every ship in their fleet was connected to every other ship, like a giant brain with 50,000 eyes. It made them incredibly efficient. It also made them incredibly vulnerable. Rachel was 31 years old and had spent her life studying things that most people could not understand. She was brilliant and quiet and had never wanted to hurt anyone. Now she had built a weapon that could destroy an entire civilization, and she prayed she would never have to use it. The weapon was not a bomb or a gun. It was a message, a simple signal that would spread through the alien communication network, like a virus. But instead of destroying their computers, it would do something much worse. It would tell the truth. Captain Morrison watched the alien fleet surround Earth from his position near Mars. The UES Liberty was damaged from the previous battle, held together with spare parts and determination. Around him, the remaining human ships waited for orders that might never come. The aliens began their attack at dawn, Earth time. Purple beams of energy reached down from space and touched the planet's surface. Where they hit, cities vanished in clouds of steam. Millions of people died in the first few minutes. The aliens were no longer playing games. But as the first beam struck Earth, Captain Collins reached his target. He transmitted his message to the alien command ship, knowing that he would die seconds later. The message was short and simple. It contained coordinates and a single word: freedom. The signal spread through the alien network faster than light itself. Every ship in the hegemony fleet received it at the same moment. But the signal did not stop there. It jumped from ship to ship, from planet to planet, until every communication device in the galaxy was carrying the same message. The message was a recording. It showed the battle in the asteroid belt, where humans had refused to surrender. It showed President Hayes declaring that some things were worth dying for. It showed human ships crashing into alien vessels, their crews choosing death over slavery. But, most importantly, it showed Admiral Vextar's fleet retreating. For 3,000 years, the aliens had seemed unstoppable. Now the entire galaxy watched them run away from a species that had barely learned to fly between stars. On the planet Altair, Admiral Kylus watched the recording in her private quarters. She was an old soldier who had surrendered to the aliens 50 years ago. Her people had been free once before the hegemony came. Now they were slaves, mining rare metals for their conquerors. Kylus had served the aliens faithfully for decades, believing that resistance was impossible. But as she watched humans die rather than kneel, something woke up inside her. Something she had thought was dead forever. On Centauri, the recording played on hidden screens in the slave camps. Workers who had been broken by years of forced labor suddenly remembered what they used to be. Fathers told their children about the time before the aliens came. Children asked why they could not be free like the humans. The Andromedans had hidden weapons for 2 centuries, waiting for a chance to use them. The Procyon had built secret factories in the depths of their homeworld. The Vegans had trained warriors in caves that the aliens could not find. All of them had been waiting for a sign that resistance was possible. The humans had given them that sign. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Foster watched from Earth's orbital defense platform as impossible things began to happen. Ships from other species were appearing at the edge of the solar system. Not alien ships, but rebel ships. Ships flown by people who had decided they were tired of being slaves. Dan was 38 years old and had spent his career planning defenses that everyone knew would never be enough. Now he was watching the galaxy come to Earth's rescue, and he could barely believe his eyes. The first to arrive were the Altarians. Admiral Kylus brought 200 ships and a message for Captain Morrison. "Better to die fighting than live, as slaves," she said, using words she had learned from the human broadcast. Then came the Centaurians, breaking free from their prison planet with stolen alien ships. The Andromedans revealed their hidden fleet. The Procyon abandoned their factories and flew to Earth with weapons they had built in secret. Dr. Maria Santos watched the quantum disruption field spread across the galaxy from her laboratory, deep inside Cheyenne Mountain. The alien communication network was collapsing under the weight of the message Rachel Thompson had created. But Maria realized something even more important was happening. The aliens could not shut down their network without losing control of their empire. But every minute it stayed active, more species joined the rebellion. The humans had not just attacked the alien fleet. They had attacked the idea that the aliens were unstoppable. General Carl Jensen found himself commanding an alliance of species that had never worked together before. Humans and Altarians and Centaurians and dozens of others, all flying different ships with different weapons and different languages. It should have been chaos. Instead, it was beautiful. Carl was 55 years old and had studied military history his entire life. He had read about ancient battles where impossible alliances had defeated superior enemies. He had never thought he would command one. Admiral Vextar watched his perfect fleet fall apart as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Rebellion on Altair, revolution on Centauri, uprisings on 100 worlds. The hegemony that had ruled for 3,000 years was crumbling in a matter of hours. He still had 50,000 ships. He could still destroy Earth and every human in the solar system. But if he did, he would have to fight every other species in the galaxy. And for the first time in his life, Admiral Vextar was not sure he could win that fight. The humans had done something no military computer could predict. They had turned their own certain death into a rallying cry for freedom. They had shown the galaxy that the aliens could be beaten, not through superior technology or tactics, but through the simple refusal to give up. As rebel ships from across the galaxy converged on Earth, Admiral Vextar made a decision that would change history. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian hegemony retreated from a battle they could have won. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy would never be the same. The rebellion spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 1,000 worlds, slaves remembered what freedom felt like. In 100 star systems, hidden weapons were pulled from their hiding places. The message the humans had sent was simple, but it changed everything. If they can fight, so can we. Admiral Kyla stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Altarian vessel Dawn's Promise, as her fleet jumped into the solar system. She was 70 years old and had gray skin, marked with the scars of old battles. Behind her flew 200 ships carrying 20,000 Altarian warriors who had chosen death over slavery. Kylus had surrendered to the Zephyrians 50 years ago when they came to her homeworld. She had watched her people become miners and factory workers, their proud warrior culture reduced to serving their conquerors. She had told herself it was better than extinction. Today she realized she had been wrong. Captain Morrison received her transmission as the Altarian fleet took position alongside the human ships. "If you will have us," Kylus said in broken English, "we would like to die with you." Morrison smiled for the first time in days. "Welcome to the fight," he replied. "But we are not planning to die. We are planning to win." On the planet Centauri, the rebellion began in the mining camps. Workers who had spent decades digging rare metals from the planet's core suddenly turned their tools into weapons. Guard towers fell to improvised explosives. Alien overseers fled in terror as their prisoners became soldiers. Commander Jake Reeves led the Centaurian breakout from Mining Station 7. He had been a ship captain before the conquest, reduced to operating heavy machinery for the aliens. Now he was stealing their ships and flying them toward Earth, carrying 30,000 volunteers who had nothing left to lose. The Centaurians arrived in the solar system with ships that still bore alien markings. They had fought their way off their homeworld with mining lasers and cargo haulers, defeating trained soldiers through sheer determination. Their fleet was a mix of stolen vessels and converted mining equipment, but they flew with the pride of free people. Dr. Lisa Carter monitored the alien communication networks from her station on Earth. The quantum disruption field that Dr. Thompson had created was still spreading through their systems. Every time the aliens tried to coordinate their response to one rebellion, 3 more would start on different worlds. Lisa had spent her career studying alien biology, but now she was studying something more important: alien psychology. The Zephyrians had ruled through fear for 3,000 years. They had convinced every species in the galaxy that resistance was impossible. The humans had shattered that belief in 18 days. The Andromedans were the 3rd species to arrive at Earth. They had hidden their fleet for 2 centuries, building ships in secret while pretending to be a peaceful trading culture. Admiral Sarah Kim, their leader, brought 300 vessels armed with weapons the aliens had never seen. Sarah was 45 years old and had spent her entire life preparing for this day. Her grandfather had commanded the Andromedan fleet when the aliens first arrived. He had surrendered rather than watch his people die in a hopeless war. Sarah had sworn she would not make the same choice. The Andromedan ships were sleek and fast, designed for hit-and-run attacks against superior forces. They had studied alien tactics for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. The human rebellion had given them that moment. General Pete Williams watched the impossible alliance form around Earth from his command center. Ships from dozens of species were arriving every hour, all carrying the same message. They wanted to fight. Pete had commanded human forces for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like this. The species that joined the rebellion were all different. Some were warriors like the Altarians, others were miners like the Centaurians, some were traders like the Andromedans, but they all shared one thing: they were tired of living in fear. The Procyon brought factory ships capable of building weapons and ammunition in space. The Vegans arrived with hospital ships to treat the wounded. The Tau-Cetians provided intelligence about alien fleet movements. Every species contributed what they could to the growing alliance. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Foster coordinated the defense. of Earth's orbital stations as the rebel fleet grew larger by the hour. Ships that had never worked together before were learning to fight as a team. Languages that had never been spoken together were creating new words for freedom. Dan had studied military history, but nothing had prepared him for commanding an army made up of 30 different species. Each group had their own tactics, their own weapons, their own way of fighting. Somehow it all worked together. Admiral Vextar found himself fighting a war on 100 fronts at once. Rebel fleets were attacking alien outposts across the galaxy. His own ships were deserting to join the rebellion. Worlds that had been peaceful for centuries were rising in revolt. The reports flooding into his command center painted a picture of total chaos. The hegemony's perfect order was collapsing everywhere at once. Vexitar had lived for over 300 years and commanded fleets that had conquered entire star systems. He had never faced anything like this. Captain Amy Lewis led a mixed squadron of human and Altarian ships in an attack on an alien supply convoy near Jupiter. Her crew included humans, Altarians, and 2 Centaurians who had escaped the mining camps. They spoke different languages and came from different worlds, but they fought like they had trained together for years. Amy was learning that courage was the same in any language. When the Altarian pilot next to her was hit by alien fire, she did not hesitate to cover his retreat. When a Centaurian ship ran out of ammunition, she shared hers. The rebellion was teaching everyone that they were stronger together than apart. Dr. Rachel Thompson worked around the clock to maintain the quantum disruption field that was crippling the alien communication network. She had created it to send a message, but now it was doing something more important. It was preventing the aliens from coordinating their response to the rebellion. Rachel had never wanted to be a warrior. She was a scientist who loved learning about the universe. But she had learned that sometimes science could be the most powerful weapon of all. Her equations were toppling an empire that had seemed eternal. The battle for Earth became the battle for the galaxy. Every species that joined, the rebellion brought ships to defend the human homeworld. They came not because they loved humans, but because they loved the idea that humans represented, that anyone could fight for freedom, no matter how hopeless it seemed. Commander Julie Parker watched refugee ships from across the galaxy arrive at Earth's orbital stations. Not just humans fleeing the war, but Altarians and Centaurians and dozens of other species who had nowhere else to go. Earth was becoming the symbol of resistance across the galaxy. Julie had spent her career moving cargo, but now she was moving hope. Every ship that arrived brought news of another world joining the rebellion. Every species that declared their freedom made the next one braver. The alien empire that had seemed unbreakable was breaking. 3,000 years of conquest were being undone in 3 weeks. The species that had ruled the galaxy through fear were learning what happened when that fear finally broke. President Linda Hayes addressed the Rebel Alliance from Earth's Orbital Command Center. Behind her, representatives from 50 different species stood together, united for the first time in galactic history. "We did not start this war," she said, her words translated into 100 languages. "But we will finish it. Not as humans, or Altarians or Centaurians, but as free people who refuse to kneel." The galaxy was waking up from a 3,000-year nightmare, and once awake, it would not go back to sleep. Admiral Vexitar stared at the reports covering his command table. Half his empire was in open rebellion. The other half was preparing to join them. The perfect order he had spent centuries building was crumbling in a matter of days. For the first time in his long life, Vextar began to understand what he was really fighting. Not just ships and weapons, but an idea. The idea that freedom was worth any price. And ideas, he was learning, were much harder to kill than people. The Battle of Sol lasted 18 days and changed the history of the galaxy forever. What had started as a simple conquest of a primitive species became the largest rebellion in 3,000 years. Admiral Vextar watched his perfect empire crumble from the bridge of his flagship as reports of uprisings flooded in from every corner of space. The rebel fleet around Earth now numbered over 200,000 ships. Species that had been enemies for centuries fought side by side against their common oppressor. Altarians flew wing to wing with Centaurians, Andromedans shared their weapons with Procyon. Humans coordinated the largest military alliance in galactic history. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, now designated as the flagship of the United Galaxy Liberation Fleet. The small cargo hauler that had once carried supplies between Earth and Mars was now the command center for forces spanning 100 star systems. Morrison had never expected to command anything larger than a single ship. Now he gave orders that moved entire fleets. The human captain was learning that leadership was not about being the strongest or the smartest. It was about giving people something to believe in. The humans had given the galaxy hope, and hope was proving to be the most powerful weapon in the universe. Admiral Vextar faced a choice that no Zephyrian commander had ever confronted. He could destroy Earth and eliminate the humans, but doing so would unite every species in the galaxy against him. Or he could negotiate, something the hegemony had never done with an inferior species. The alien admiral was 300 years old and had personally conquered 17 worlds. He had never retreated from a battle he could win. But as reports came in of entire sectors joining the rebellion, he began to understand that winning this battle would mean losing the war. On the 18th day of the siege, a small human ship approached the alien flagship under a flag of truce. Captain Steve Collins, the same pilot who had delivered the message that started the Galactic Rebellion, carried new coordinates. Not to a weapon this time, but to a meeting place. The negotiations took place on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. Representatives from 50 species gathered in a hastily built conference center, while their fleets maintained an uneasy ceasefire around them. It was the first time in galactic history that so many different people had sat at the same table as equals. President Linda Hayes led the human delegation. Beside her sat Admiral Kylus of the Altarians, Commander Reeves of the Centaurians, and dozens of other leaders who had risked everything for freedom. Across from them, Admiral Vextar sat alone, representing an empire that was collapsing around him. The negotiations were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrians had given orders, and other species had obeyed. Now they were being asked to justify their rule, and they had no answers that satisfied anyone. Dr. Lisa Carter served as a translator during the talks, helping different species understand each other. She had spent her career studying alien life, but now she was watching alien cultures learn to work together. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen in a laboratory. The Zephyrians offered to reduce their tributes and ease their restrictions on conquered worlds. But the rebels were no longer interested in better cages. They wanted freedom, complete and total. The negotiations deadlocked for 3 days while fleets faced each other across the solar system. Admiral Vextar finally broke the silence with a question that revealed how little he understood the enemy he faced. "What do you want?" he asked President Hayes. "We can give you technology, territory, a place in our empire. What do you want from us?" Hayes looked at the alien commander who had ruled the galaxy longer than human civilization had existed. "We want you to leave," she said simply. "We want you to go home and never come back. We want every species to be free to choose their own destiny." The alien admiral stared at her in confusion. In his experience, conquered species always wanted something from their conquerors. Better treatment, more resources, higher status. They never asked for the impossible. They never asked for freedom itself. But as Vextar looked around the table at representatives from 50 different worlds, he saw something he had never seen before. Unity. These species had nothing in common except their desire to be free. They had built an alliance based on principles instead of fear. The breakthrough came when a young Centaurian engineer named Ben Torres presented evidence of atrocities committed by the hegemony across the galaxy. Billions dead, entire cultures destroyed, worlds strip-mined until they could no longer support life. The Zephyrians had ruled through genocide, and the galaxy was tired of dying. Admiral Vextar listened to the charges against his people and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: shame. He had told himself that conquest was necessary, for order, that the weak needed the strong to guide them. Now he saw what his guidance had really meant. The final session of the negotiations was broadcast across the galaxy. Every inhabited world watched as Admiral Vextar signed the document that ended 3,000 years of Zephyrian rule. The hegemony would withdraw to their home systems. The conquered worlds would be free. The galaxy would govern itself. Captain Morrison watched the signing from Earth's orbital command center. Around him, humans and aliens worked together to coordinate the transition to freedom. Ships that had been enemies days before were now cooperating to deliver supplies to worlds devastated by the war. The hardest part of victory was not winning the war, but deciding what to do afterward. 50 species had different ideas about how the galaxy should be governed. Some wanted revenge against the Zephyrians. Others wanted to ignore them completely. A few even wanted to trade with them. Dr. Rachel Thompson found herself appointed to design the new galactic communication network. The quantum disruption field she had created to fight the aliens was being rebuilt to connect free worlds. Her weapon of war was becoming a tool of peace. General Pete Williams supervised the demobilization of the largest military force in galactic history. Millions of ships and billions of soldiers were returning to their homes, but they were not the same people who had left. They had fought together, and they knew they could do it again if necessary. The new Galactic Republic was established on Earth, not because humans demanded it, but because every other species insisted. The planet that had refused to surrender became the symbol of freedom across the galaxy. Its blue skies and green forests became a pilgrimage site for people who had never breathed free air. Admiral Kylus was elected as the first Supreme Commander of the Republican fleet. At 70 years old, she had gone from slave to liberator to protector of galactic freedom. Her first order was to establish protocols ensuring that no species would ever again face genocide alone. President Hayes addressed the new Galactic Assembly from the same podium where she had declared humanity's intention to fight. But instead of defiance, her words carried hope. "We have learned that freedom is not given," she said. "It is taken. And once taken, it must be guarded by all who cherish it." Admiral Vextar returned to the Zephyrian home systems with the remnants of his once mighty fleet. His people, who had ruled the galaxy for millennia, now found themselves isolated and forgotten. Some called for a return to war, but Vextar had seen what unified resistance could accomplish. The former admiral spent his remaining years writing a history of the rebellion. He called it The Price of Arrogance, and it became required reading in the military academies of the Republic. His final entry was simple. "We forgot that power without consent is tyranny, and tyranny always falls." Captain Steve Collins, the pilot who had carried the message that started the rebellion, became the first human ambassador to the Zephyrian systems. His mission was to help former enemies become neighbors, a task that many thought impossible. Steve had made a career of doing impossible things. Dr. Carter established the Galactic Institute for Xenobiology on Earth, dedicated to studying the incredible diversity of life in the galaxy. Her first students included humans, Altarians, Centaurians, and even a few young Zephyrians who wanted to learn about the species their people had tried to destroy. The war had lasted 18 days, but its effects would last forever. Children, who had been born into slavery, grew up as free citizens. Worlds that had been strip-mined were restored. Cultures that had been suppressed flourished again. The galaxy became a place where being different was celebrated instead of punished. Commander Torres, now an admiral in the Republican fleet, often reflected on how quickly everything had changed. 18 days earlier, humanity had faced extinction. Now they were part of the largest free society in galactic history. It was, he thought, the strangest thing that had ever happened. But perhaps the strangest thing of all was how easily the various species learned to live together once they were no longer forced to. Trade routes that had been monopolized by the hegemony became highways for cultural exchange. Wars that had been fought for centuries ended when the artificial scarcity that caused them was eliminated. The galaxy discovered that most conflicts had been created by the Zephyrians to keep their subjects divided. Without a common oppressor, species found they had much more in common than they had thought.